In higher education, colleges, one of the biggest considerations for outsourcing is food service. Who's the provider here at Mount Vernon? Anybody know?
Pioneer.
Hyatt?
Pioneer.
I didn't catch that.
Pioneer.
Pioneer, okay. Pioneer. I don't know how many places they supply, but they obviously are an outsourcing company. It makes much more sense, doesn't it, to have a company come in when the larger your college gets and the more complex things are. If you want your food to be good, and I don't know how you consider the food here, but if you want the food to be good, you're probably better to outsource it. When I first started in college, back in my very first in undergraduate, I went to a small school that they did it themselves because it was such a small group on campus, and so selections were really very limited. Now they like almost everybody else outsource food service. We have formal structure in sport organizations. That's one of the things we talked about early on, that even though there is a process going on within sport communication, there has to be a formal structure. This is the design or arrangement of its divisions, its departments, the different units. For example, here at Mount Vernon, now I don't know all the how everything is arranged, but let's start with athletics. There's an athletic director. He would be at the top of the food chain in athletics, but then he answers to somebody, right? Some administrator higher. Who's underneath the athletic director? Who answers directly to the athletic director? Well, where are the coaches? Head coaches? Okay. Maybe a better example would be within the academic unit. You probably heard the school of or the department of, and wondered what's the difference between those. Departments are usually smaller, and they sit within schools, and sport management would be like a program. It's a program within the Department of Business, and that is within the School of Business. I'm not stating it clearly, but if you get the idea, there'd be a department of management and so forth, and all of those are in business. So that's the formal structure, and it's reflected in communication by lateral communication, up and down communication, or grapevine communication. For example, if I am a coach in a college program and I need to talk about arranging gym time, well, it's a lot easier if I approach the other coach without going to the top. A lot of things can be worked out just dealing on a lateral basis. But when things get difficult, you go up the ladder. You do an end run, so to speak. A grapevine type of communication is where you get the word out to everybody. So if you are a member of a sport organization, let's say we're talking about a retail organization, and the salespeople that are on the road, the retail people in the store, other staff, and a memo goes out to all of them. That's a grapevine type of communication where everybody gets the same message. Really, really important that everybody get the same message. When we begin to see messages that are message is given to different people, different groups, and you find out somewhere along the way that, gee, they heard about that, but I didn't. I didn't know that was going to happen. The years I've been in higher education, almost 40 years, well, including this, it'd be over 40, but that's what you want. I want information. You know, I can't do anything unless I know what's going on. And so you are going to be in positions, whether it's an entry-level position, a middle manager, upper, you're going to be in a position where you want information and you are going to be responsible for giving information. And if we go back to that model of the correlation, organizational leadership communication in sport, it's the degree of truthfulness, transparency, and so forth directly affects the effectiveness of that organization. So if you have lying going on here in the messaging, how can you have an effective organization? Simple as that. There's obviously a physical structure in most sport organizations, and there is a conceptual structure, and that's where we talk about levels of reporting. Now, I know you can't read this from where you're sitting probably, but this is a screenshot of part of the front office for the Cleveland Indians. And there's probably one or two above here, like the owner and so forth. But notice how far down we go, and it goes, much deeper than that. But here's a good example of a formal structure. You can go to any of the major league leagues, NFL, MLS, Major League Baseball, and go to any team, and you're going to see a formal structure, something like this. So if you need information about a particular thing, you know where to go. Also, these people up here, somewhere along the line, are going to communicate with these people down here. Maybe not directly. Gene Smith, the athletic director for Ohio State. Do you think he sends out a memo to all his staff members every day? Or ever? Probably sometimes, but I think he has people under him that send out memos and emails to people that work for the athletic department. So, the up and down communication that's occurring doesn't necessarily start up here, or it may start in concept, but it's not communicated from there necessarily. And here's what we've been talking about here. Formal structure. We have 5 organizational principles that influence the structural design. We have the division of labor and departmentalization. We have the chain of command, the span of control, authority, and coordination. So the division of labor and departmentalization. If you come into an organization that already has this set up, you just got to fit in where you do. A new faculty member coming into Mount Vernon would, they just came to teach, so they fit into that department, if you will. And then the chain of command. Well, that new faculty member knows that he or she reports to the department chair. You know that ahead of time. The span of control. That means okay, how much control does this person here have? Here's the CEO, and he he reports to these two individuals. This is just this is kind of a template. But then, if we're talking about span of control, it means that what is this guy or lady, what falls into their purview of responsibility? Would you say that the sports information director at NBNU who do you think the sports information director reports to? Who is his boss? Another hard question. Well, Paul?
Is that who you report to?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't thought of that. Well, I don't know the formal structure with him. I'm guessing that let's say in a normal situation, the SID would report probably in a small college to the AD. Now, Paul's situation is unique here in terms of raising money, and he has a lot of other duties involved in preparation and the experience of games. So I'm guessing he reports also to the AD. But I'm glad you mentioned that. Authority, well, does the athletic director here have the authority to tell the person who provides concessions that, hey, we no longer want Pepsi, we want Coke? Very doubtful. Let's talk about that for a second. Whatever college you go to, I find this very interesting because I've served at full-time at 4 different schools, and now I'm part-time here. It's either a Pepsi school or a Coke school. And Ohio State, for example, is Coke. Imagine the account they have. Well, here's my experience with that. When I was at Northwest Nazarene, I came there, they were a Pepsi school. That means that Pepsi provided all their soda and beverages in the machines. They were exclusive. Coke was not there, unless you bought one and brought it in. In exchange, we not only got a take from the machines, but they gave us stuff. They gave us they managed our light board outside our building. When the bulbs went out, they replaced them. They gave us limitless Powerade. They gave us big thermos jugs to put it in. And then, any number of things. One time I asked the Pepsi guy, why is it that you can give us all this stuff? What's the deal? He goes, you have no idea how much Pepsi your students drink. Well, their contract ran out while I was there. And so both Coke and Pepsi made offers. And they ended up staying with Pepsi for a 10-year contract. And so the college got a lot of stuff for that, for the privilege of having just Pepsi machines on campus. I'd be interested to know what type of deal we have here, but that's the way it works. I can't imagine how Coke provides for Ohio State. Here's a bit of trivia for you. Back when Ray Kroc started McDonald's, which would have been late 50s, early 60s. Now I hear this is true, but he went to Pepsi and said, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. Would you be interested in being my exclusive provider for beverages?" Pepsi turned it down. Wouldn't you imagine they're kicking themselves ever since? They're all Coke. Huh. here's what we've been talking about, the formal structure. You have decentralization versus centralization. Notice the illustration here. Here's where it's centralized. Here's the person at top. And everything comes down from him or her. I've worked in organizations like that. Nothing wrong with that, as long as that person isn't a dictator. Or you have decentralization, where, you know, it's a little more complex, but it's not as straightforward as centralized. Which is better? Kind of depends, doesn't it? Depends on the organization and who's at the top. The examples at the right are simple, but get the point across. Note how much communication flows from one individual or department to any of the others in the decentralized model. So, whereas this guy only he sends stuff like that, this person over here really has the ability to talk with many people. So there's good things to say about both. Informal structure. Now, the example that you probably can't read the caption there in the cartoon. How can you say we're not behaving like a team? We're all wearing the same color shirts, aren't we? So the example above may be lame, but what is one of the first things we notice about groups and teams? They all sport the same shirt or jacket or whatever. That's the way to identify. That's a message that you're getting across. For years, and I forget whether they still do, for years the Globetrotters used to wear shorts that had red stripes on them, and you recognized them by that. And you probably can think of a team that you automatically recognize from the uniform. It's so different from anybody else's. One example comes to me is the Seahawks. They went, actually their color scheme is pretty close to this, but you can kind of tell, regardless of how they arrange the colors, you can almost pick it up. Or Oregon is even a better example. They started doing these really like neon colors, and now a lot of people do that. How about the helmets that have the matte kind of color? Instead of a shiny, it's a matte finish, M-A-T-T-E. So anymore, there are so many schools that you can define or identify by that kind of the message that they're putting out. Horizontal communication typically does not constitute the formal or official communication in a sport organization because it does not follow the chain of command. That makes sense, doesn't it? If two coaches, let's go back to the example of sharing the gym. Okay, so right now, volleyball is in season. Well, we can hear basketball practicing out there now. Is that a prime time in the gym? No. Most schools, if they just have one gymnasium, the prime time goes to the in-season sports. So volleyball is going to get the primary time. Now, let's say the two coaches work that out. But let's say the person above them that they report to has something else in his mind or her mind. Okay, so sometimes lateral communication, while it is easy to do, you overstep the authority who may have some other idea. So it's there's nothing wrong with the up and down direction of communication. Here's where we talked about the grapevines in an informal structure. Unofficial, informal method of moving messages in all directions, kind of like rumors, pass through conversation and text messages and email, Twitter. Boy, don't we see a lot of that informal communication going on. You know, our current president was the first president to use Twitter, and I don't know how many times a day he's on it, but there are fact checkers out there, and how many times a day do these fact checkers find that what he's saying is not accurate or misleading or totally wrong? I'm just saying this falls within this informal way of communicating, and this is one of the things that we see happening. Informal networks, where you have relationships formed outside the formal structure. Here's some examples, like for instance, here's an undated picture of William Oxley, who was a former OSU president, with a Beat Michigan sign. Shelter in place. Well, that's an informal message, but the message it gives you is vitally important if you're in a public facility. That's a new phrase we hear. Shelter in place. Until, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, we didn't see that. Because I didn't see it. That means that here's an area of the building where you can go, and if something's happening, that's probably the safest place to be. Often within a stairwell. It might be in one of the restrooms, but the shelter in place. Okay, let's talk about culture for a little while. Culture approach focuses on everyday communication of organizational members. It can be viewed, this is important, it can be viewed as manifestation of the organization's internal operational influences, practices, beliefs, norms, and values. Interestingly enough, the culture is about the only thing that leaders within the organization can control. Think about it. Within MBNU, what is the culture? We talked about this one day after class. After our lecture, we shared culture of MBNU and other schools. What is the culture here? Well, to a great degree, it is determined by the president and/or the board of trustees and those immediately reporting to the president. They come up with, slogans and sayings and policies. Those constitute culture. It supports everything that the business is trying to do. It attracts the industry's best people. Now, here's an example. I'm talking about Nike again here. Nike's organizational culture is centered on creativity and innovation to provide products that suit their current consumer preferences. So, in what ways has Nike taken the lead in changing the culture? Think of what's something Nike has done that they were the first ones to do it? Anybody?
They made that new shoe that has like the marathon runners.
Yeah. In fact, that's what he's holding right there. The Nike Zoom X Vaporfly. It has a sole that was too thick, and he ran a sub 2-hour marathon, which it's the first time it's ever been done. But he was wearing the Vaporfly shoes. Since then, the powers that be within track and field in the United States has said that new models that come out have to be out to the public for 6 months before you can ratify a record use with them. Let's back up and here's the very first cultural component that we see from Nike. Anybody ever hear of the waffle shoe? Okay, the coach the track coach and cross country coach at Oregon back in the day, back in the 50s and early 60s, his name was Bill Bowerman. He had this idea that he could make a shoe with a rubber sole that looked like a waffle. And he actually used his wife's waffle irons to make the first ones. I guess he went through many waffle irons, ruined a number of them. But picture, if you will, a sole of a shoe with the sole is rubber and it has waffle things sticking out. That was the first time the running community ever saw anything like that. The waffle runner, waffle shoe. Okay, that was an innovation by Nike, and a lot of people were slow on liking it, but found out that it's a great training shoe. You know, it's not thick and clunky, and you can actually race in it if you want. Well, that's from there. You know, Nike has gone on to different kinds of shoes that they come out with. And they're a lot of times the very first ones to do it. Each organization is home to shared meanings and predominant beliefs, goals, activities. Cultural factors in sport organizations include the environment, the mission, the various tasks. Cultural functions. They provide knowledge about the organization. They help members identify. Over here is a facsimile of a certificate of stock of ownership of the Green Bay Packers. The Packers are the only NFL team who sell stock ownership, who sell stock to their fans or anybody. If you want to buy stock in the Packers, you can do it. There is no benefit to it other than you say, I have stock in the Packers and I can go to their annual meeting. You don't get any money for it, you don't own the company, you don't get to make any decisions, but you do get to go once a year to their meeting, and you do get to have this certificate, and it's worth it to a lot of people just to have that. That's part of their culture. Like I said down here, the owners of these certificates receive a worthless stock certificate and can attend the yearly stockholders meeting, but have no say in the club actions. The culture of an organization defines the organizational boundaries. Nike started out with shoes. Now, is there anything they don't make? I remember when they came out with the Nike golf ball. And I thought, how is that going to become an item until Tiger Woods started using the Nike golf ball?
They actually don't make it anymore.
Don't they?
No.
Okay, so there you go. My guess is that it proved to be not as financially a sound decision as going with clothing and shoes. Okay, that's good. I appreciate that. I didn't know that. What's Tiger hitting now?
Bridgestone.
Bridgestone. Interesting. Okay. forms of culture, there are three that we talk about. Symbols, schemas, and scripts. And a symbol is like a logo, a slogan, some kind of a metaphor. It might be an alliteration. Think of teams that you know about that use alliterative names or phrases, or possibly use double meaning words. And the symbols, obviously, the logos. Schemas are stored representations of knowledge that help the organization's members make sense of information. So, if you want to know something about the culture of all of that, then at some point you need to go to the Constitution of the university. Here's an example of what I mean. The first school that I taught at was Malone University in Canton. And in their Constitution, it said they will not have football. Now, they started out as Cleveland Bible College back in 1800 something. No, it was early 1900s. Whatever. But the Constitution of the college said no football. It's a Quaker school. You know, Quaker, you identify with nonviolence. And so they thought, okay, we'll have sports, but we don't want football. Well, along came a president about 1992 or 3. I was working there then, coaching there then, and the president asked, why don't you have football? Well, why didn't we have football? Well, one is the Constitution says we can't. Two, we're in kind of like the football mecca. You know, the Hall of Fame, Football Hall of Fame is just down the street. We've got McKinley High School down the street, who probably would be better than Malone to begin with. You know, went on and on. But the president wanted football. Now, there was one real big positive to having football. That is, you automatically get about 100 guys that you otherwise would not have gotten. So it's an enrollment booster. So they started football, but they had to change the Constitution first. And that's where it comes into this schema idea. How do you add that sport? Well, you're going to have to go to the very beginning and change it.